Infertile giant cowboy won a 16-year-old girl in a poker game. What he did next shocked everyone. Dust swirls through the saloon as the giant cowboy lays his final card on the table. The room goes silent. Across from him, a silver-tongued gambler pushes forward his wager. A girl, 16 years old, thin, defiant, the preacher's ward, now handed over like coin. The cowboy rises, towering over the table, refusing to meet her eyes. But outside, under the flicker of the lamplight, he learns the truth. The preacher traded her away to save the mission from ruin. And the gambler, he's already sold her labor to a mining camp 2 days north. From that moment, it's a race through cold nights, hidden trails, and shadowed danger. Because the girl can cook and track better than most men, but she's up against someone who'd burn a ranch to the ground for water. What will happen when the man who's sworn off family is forced to fight for the one person he never expected to protect? And how far will he go when the past he's buried collides with the future she deserves? Before we begin, drop a hello in the comments. Share your corner of the world and how you're feeling today. It's a beautiful thing to witness how stories can connect us across oceans, languages, and lives. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Copper Creek's dusty main street as Caleb Bear Hensley rode into town. His horse's hooves kicked up small clouds with each step, the sound echoing off the weathered wooden buildings. The cattle sale had gone better than expected, wrapping up hours ahead of schedule, but that only meant more time in town, something Caleb never relished. He reined his horse to a stop outside the Golden Nugget Saloon, its weather-beaten sign creaking in the breeze. Another buyer had arranged to meet him here, though the location made his jaw tighten. Through the grimy windows, he could see the usual afternoon crowd already gathering. The saloon's batwing doors groaned as Caleb pushed through them. The familiar smell of stale whiskey and tobacco smoke hit him like a wall. Piano music tinkled from the corner, competing with the clink of glasses and murmur of voices. He scanned the room, but there was no sign of his buyer. In the far corner, a poker game was in full swing, clouds of cigar smoke hanging thick above the table. Silas Murdoch sat there, dealing cards with practiced grace. His fancy vest and gold watch chain marked him as a man who made his living from others' losses. "Well, if it ain't the mighty Bear Hensley himself," Murdoch called out, his voice smooth as honey, but with a sharp edge underneath. "Care to join us? Unless you're afraid to risk some of that cattle money." Caleb shook his head. "I don't play cards, Murdoch. You know that." "Course not," Murdoch drawled. "Man of principle, ain't you? Too good for our company, I expect." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Shame. Table could use some fresh money. The other players chuckled, and Caleb felt heat rise in his neck. He'd seen too many good men lose everything at tables like this one. Still, something made him pause instead of walking away. Murdoch shuffled the deck with flourish. "Tell you what, just one hand. Show these fellows you ain't yellow." "My word stands," Caleb said firmly. "I don't gamble. Even when the stakes might interest you." Murdoch's eyes glittered. "I've got something special to wager. Something that might appeal to a lonely rancher." The other players exchanged glances as Murdoch pulled out a folded paper. "Legal guardianship of one Maddie Bell. 16 years old, healthy, good worker. Worth more than money to the right man." Caleb's blood ran cold. "You're trading a person?" "Just a contract, friend. All legal and proper." Murdoch's smile widened. "Girl's been nothing but trouble at the mission anyway. Reverend Teal signed her over himself." The room had gone quiet, even the piano player's fingers stilling on the keys. Caleb felt his hands curl into fists. "That ain't right." "Right as the law allows." Murdoch countered. "So what do you say?" One hand. "Your cattle money against the girl's papers." Everything in Caleb screamed to walk away, but the thought of leaving any soul in Murdoch's hands— "Deal the cards," he said quietly. The hand played out in tense silence. Caleb's heart pounded as he studied his cards. 2 pair, kings and tens. Across the table, Murdoch's face gave nothing away. "Show 'em," Murdoch finally said, laying down his hand. 3 nines. Caleb revealed his cards. The room erupted in mutters as Murdoch's smile vanished. "Well now," Murdoch said, voice tight. He gestured to the corner. "There's your property, Hensley." For the first time, Caleb noticed the girl standing in the shadows. She was thin as a rail, with wary eyes that reminded him of a trapped animal. When he stepped toward her, she shrank back. "It's all right," he said softly. "Let's get you out of here." "Don't touch me," she spat, but her voice trembled. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the street in deep orange. Caleb led the way to the mission house, the girl following at a distance. His mind raced. Surely Reverend Teal hadn't actually signed away a child's guardianship to a gambler. But when the preacher opened the door, his face told the truth before he spoke a word. He looked years older than Caleb remembered, shoulders bowed under an invisible weight. "Reverend," Caleb said, "tell me this ain't what it seems." Teal wouldn't meet his eyes. The mission needed repairs. He said quietly. "Winter coming on, roof leaking, no food in the storehouse. Mr. Murdoch offered a loan, but he wanted insurance." "So you sold a girl?" The words tasted bitter in Caleb's mouth. "I had no choice!" Teal's voice cracked. 20 other children would have frozen or starved. I thought God would understand." Behind them, Maddie made a sound like a wounded animal. Before either man could move, she had darted away into the gathering darkness. Caleb watched her go, his heart heavy. He'd won her freedom from Murdoch, but at what cost to her trust? And now he was responsible for a wild, hurt child who clearly wanted nothing to do with him. The last rays of sunlight faded from the sky as he stood there, the weight of what had happened settling over him like a heavy blanket. He'd ridden into town expecting a simple business meeting. Instead, he'd become guardian to a girl who'd been traded like cattle, and somehow had to find a way to make it right. The evening air grew sharp with autumn's bite as Caleb paced the mission's worn porch boards. Each step creaked beneath his boots while he struggled to make sense of this mess. Inside, lamplight spilled through dusty windows, casting weak yellow squares onto the packed dirt yard. "There has to be a way to undo this," Caleb said, his voice rough with frustration. No court would uphold such a deal. Reverend Teal wrung his hands, his earlier defiance crumbling into despair. "It's worse than that, I'm afraid. Murdoch, he filed papers 2 days ago. He's arranged to sell Maddie's labor contract to the Silver Creek mining camp cookhouse." Caleb stopped pacing. "What?" "He leaves at first light tomorrow to finalize the sale." Teal's shoulders sagged further. 2 days' ride north of here. The news hit Caleb like a physical blow. He'd seen those mining camp cookhouses, harsh places where workers were treated like property, especially young women with no protection. Maddie stood in the doorway, her face half hidden in shadow. Her jaw was set in a hard line, but she said nothing to protest her fate. The silence felt heavier than any plea could have been. Caleb studied her, seeing past the defensive posture to the steel in her spine. No child should have to face such choices alone. "There's one legal way to stop this," he said slowly. "I claim the guardianship I won fair and square." Teal's eyes widened. "You'd take responsibility for her. Your ranch is 10 miles out, and winter's coming. Better than letting Murdoch sell her to that cookhouse." Caleb turned to Maddie. "What do you say?" She lifted her chin. "Reckon I ain't got much choice either way." "There's always a choice," Caleb said quietly. "I'm offering you a fair home, honest work, and my word that no one will trade you away again." Something flickered in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or at least calculation. After a long moment, she gave a sharp nod. "Get your things," Caleb told her. "We'll need to move quick before Murdoch sobers up enough to cause trouble." While Maddie gathered her meager belongings, Teal hurriedly copied out a proper guardianship document by lamplight. His pen scratched across the paper, the sound mixing with the tick of the mission's ancient clock. "I'll have the court clerk witness this first thing tomorrow," Caleb said, tucking the paper into his vest pocket. "Make it all legal and proper." Maddie emerged with a thin bedroll under one arm and a small tin box clutched in her other hand. Everything she owned in the world? Caleb realized with a pang. They stepped out into the night, their breath visible in the cold air. The moon had risen, painting the street in silver light. Their boots crunched on frost-crisp grass as they made their way to the livery stable. Inside, the stable was warm with horse smell and hay. Caleb's big bay gelding, Bearcat, nickered a greeting. The horse stood 17 hands high, his solid frame matching his owner's build. "We'll have to ride double," Caleb said as he saddled Bearcat. "It's too far to walk, and we need distance before dawn." Maddie's eyes narrowed at the horse's size, but she didn't protest. Once mounted, Caleb reached down to help her up behind him. She settled the bedroll across her lap, still clutching her tin box. They rode out of town under a star-filled sky, Bearcat's hooves steady on the familiar trail. The night grew colder as they climbed into rougher country. After an hour's ride, Caleb spotted a suitable arroyo, sheltered from the wind, with good sight lines and a nearby spring. "We'll camp here," he said, swinging down. "Get an early start tomorrow." He gathered wood while Maddie cleared a space for their bedrolls. Soon a small fire crackled, pushing back the darkness. They sat on opposite sides of the flames, the silence stretching between them. "There need to be some rules," Caleb said finally. "I expect respect and honest work. No running off. These hills ain't safe for anyone alone, much less a young girl." Maddie's thin smile caught him off guard. "I can cook and track better than most men," she said. "Learned from the best trail hands and camp cooks across 3 territories." Caleb nodded slowly. "Good skills to have. We'll put them to use." In the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their yips and howls echoing off the canyon walls. Maddie glanced toward the sound but showed no fear. "Better get some sleep," Caleb said, banking the fire. "Long ride tomorrow." They laid out their bedrolls, Maddie positioning hers where she could see both Caleb and the arroyo's entrance. Smart girl, he thought. Trust would take time. The fire's embers glowed red as the coyotes sang to the moon. Caleb stayed awake long after Maddie's breathing steadied into sleep, wondering what tomorrow would bring. He'd ridden into town to sell cattle and somehow ended up responsible for a child's life. The Lord surely had a sense of humor. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as Caleb stirred the campfire's remains. Frost had settled thick overnight, whitening the arroyo's walls and their bedrolls. Maddie was already up, her blankets neatly rolled, watching him with alert eyes. "Best get moving," Caleb said, offering her a piece of jerky for breakfast. "Long ride ahead." Bearcat's breath came out in steamy clouds as Caleb saddled him. The big bay stamped his hooves, eager to warm up. Frost crunched beneath their boots as they broke camp, the morning air sharp enough to sting their lungs. Once mounted, they followed the trail north. The sun climbed slowly, but the day stayed cool. Maddie sat stiffly behind Caleb, trying to find a comfortable position on the saddle's hard leather. "Ain't used to riding double," she admitted after a particularly rough patch of trail. "We'll take it slow," Caleb assured her. He pointed to a distinctive peak ahead, its crown touched with early snow. "That there's Eagle Mountain. Keep it on your right shoulder heading north. You'll never lose your way to town." Maddie studied the landmark intently. "What's that lower ridge to the west?" "Copper Ridge. Follows the creek down to the valley." Caleb gestured to where the morning sun cast long shadows. "See how the shadow line moves? You can tell time that way, counting the ridges it crosses." They continued like this through the morning, Caleb naming peaks and teaching her to read the land signs. Maddie absorbed it all silently, her eyes tracking each feature he identified. Near midday, they rounded a bend to find a mounted figure waiting in the shade of a pine grove. Maddie tensed, but Caleb raised a hand in greeting. "Two Hawks," he called out. "Good to see you, friend." The Ute horse trader sat easily on his paint pony, dark eyes taking in their unusual arrangement. He wore a mix of native and settler clothing, beaded vest over a cotton shirt, leather leggings, and well-worn boots. "Bear," Two Hawks replied, using Caleb's nickname. His gaze shifted to Maddie. "You have company today." Caleb dismounted, helping Maddie down to rest Bearcat. While she stretched her legs, he explained the situation in low tones. The poker game, Murdoch's scheme, the rushed guardianship. Two Hawks listened without interruption, only the slight narrowing of his eyes showing his thoughts. When Caleb finished, the horse trader nodded slowly. "Murdoch moves like a snake in tall grass," he said. "His gold company friends press hard on mission lands, offering deals for water rights." He gestured to the creek flowing nearby. "They say they need it for mining, but their paper claims spread like wildfire." Caleb frowned. "The mission's water feeds half the valley." "And your ranch?" Two Hawks reminded him. "Watch your boundaries, friend. Snake bites when least expected." They shared dried meat and water before parting ways. Two Hawks touched his hat brim to Maddie, who returned the gesture with careful dignity. The afternoon stretched long as they continued north. Maddie's discomfort showed in her rigid posture, though she never complained. When they finally stopped to make camp by a clear-running creek, she moved stiffly as she helped gather firewood. "I can cook," she offered, eyeing the saddlebags, "if you've got supplies." Caleb handed over his basic provisions: bacon, cornmeal, coffee. To his surprise, Maddie handled them with practiced ease. She built up the fire just right, positioned the skillet perfectly, and soon had bacon sizzling while she mixed cornmeal for Johnny Cake. The smell made his mouth water. When she served up the food, bacon crisp, Johnny Cake golden brown, Caleb took an appreciative bite. "This is mighty fine cooking," he said. "Where'd you learn?" Maddie poked at her own portion. "Here and there. Mostly mining camps when I was younger. Trail cooks showed me their ways." She paused. "Boarding houses, too, when Ma was still alive." The words came slowly, like water from a deep well. "Moved around a lot after she passed. Different towns, different uncles." Her voice hardened on the last word. "Most weren't worth trusting." Caleb set his plate down, choosing his next words carefully. "Must have been hard, never knowing where you'd end up." She shrugged, but her shoulders stayed tense. "Learned to take care of myself. Cook, clean, mend clothes, track game if needed. Make myself useful so they'd keep me around." Her eyes lifted to his, challenging. "That's what you want too, ain't it? Someone useful." "What I want," Caleb said firmly, "is to make sure you're safe. No more uncles, no more trading you away. You've got a home now, long as you want it." Maddie studied him for a long moment, firelight flickering across her face. She didn't reply, but some of the tension eased from her frame. They finished eating in companionable quiet. Above them, stars began pricking through the darkening sky, bright and countless. The fire burned low, its warmth holding back the night's chill, while creek water murmured nearby. Caleb watched Maddie efficiently clean their cooking gear, her movements sure and practiced. She was no stranger to hard work or rough living, but there was something else there too. A wariness born of too many broken promises, too many people who'd seen her as something to use rather than protect. Well, that would change now. He'd given his word, and Caleb, Bear Hensley, kept his promises. Grey clouds rolled across the morning sky, heavy with the promise of snow. Caleb studied the weather as he and Maddie broke camp, noting how the wind carried the sharp bite of winter. "Storm's coming," he said, securing their gear to Bearcat's saddle. "We'll need to push hard today to reach the ranch before it hits." Maddie nodded, already wrapped in her thin coat. She mounted behind him without complaint, though her muscles must have ached from yesterday's long ride. They made good time through the morning, Bearcat's hooves eating up the miles as the clouds gathered darker overhead. The wind picked up, carrying the first sporadic flakes of snow. Caleb felt Maddie shiver against his back, but kept pushing forward. Better to be saddle-sore than caught in a storm. By late afternoon, the familiar sight of his ranch came into view. The modest homestead sat nestled against a grove of pine trees, a sturdy log cabin with smoke curling from its stone chimney, a weathered barn, and a corral built from split rails. Beyond stretched the winter pasture, vast and open, dotted with patches of snow. Maddie straightened behind him, taking it all in. "It's so big," she breathed, wonder creeping into her voice. "All this land is yours?" "Goes clear to that far ridge," Caleb confirmed, pointing west. "Good grazing land, blessed with reliable water." He guided Bearcat toward the barn. "Speaking of which, let's get this fellow settled before that storm hits proper." Inside the barn, warm animal smells greeted them, hay and horse and leather. Caleb showed Maddie where to hang tack and how to measure out feed, pleased at how carefully she noted each detail. "You've worked with horses before?" he asked, watching her run a brush over Bearcat's sweaty flanks. "Some. Mostly mules at the mining camps." Her strokes were gentle but thorough. "Animals make more sense than people sometimes. They don't lie about what they want." Caleb nodded, understanding more than she probably meant to reveal. When Bearcat was properly cooled and fed, they hurried through the swirling snow to the cabin's front door. The kitchen welcomed them with blessed warmth from the cook stove. Caleb lit the lamp on the table, its glow making the room feel snug against the gathering storm. Simple furnishings filled the space. A pine table with 4 chairs, a dish dresser holding blue and white plates, well-worn cupboards stocked with provisions. "Let me get some coffee going," Caleb said, hanging his coat on a peg. "Then I'll show you where everything is." Maddie stood just inside the door, clutching her small tin of belongings, eyes taking in every detail. She looked both wary and hopeful, like a half-wild creature uncertain whether to flee or stay. While the coffee boiled, Caleb gave her a tour of the cabin's main floor, kitchen, sitting room with its stone fireplace, his bedroom off the back. Then he led her to the ladder, reaching up to the loft. "This'll be your space," he said, holding the lamp high so she could see. The peaked ceiling created a cozy area, with a window at each end and smooth plank flooring. "It ain't fancy, but it's private." Maddie climbed up to explore, her footsteps light overhead. Caleb heard her small intake of breath when she discovered the chest of quilts. His wife's handiwork, folded and stored away these 10 years past. Back in the kitchen, he poured coffee into 2 tin cups, adding a splash of cream to both. Maddie descended the ladder and accepted hers with murmured thanks. "Stew for supper?" she asked after a moment, eyeing the pantry door. "I saw carrots in the root cellar when we came in." "That'd be welcome," Caleb agreed. He watched as she gathered ingredients with quiet efficiency. Carrots, potatoes, dried beef, onions. Soon savory smells filled the kitchen as she worked at the cook stove. A soft humming caught his attention. The tune was achingly familiar. Amazing Grace, his Sarah's favorite hymn. She'd sung it while quilting, while gardening, while rocking on the porch at sunset. Caleb's throat tightened, but he kept silent, not wanting to make Maddie self-conscious. The wind rose as evening deepened, rattling the shutters and moaning around the eaves. Inside, the lamp cast warm circles of light while they ate their stew with fresh bread. Maddie had proved to be as good a cook as she'd claimed, though she seemed unused to sitting at a proper table for meals. After the dishes were washed, she climbed back to the loft, taking one of Sarah's quilts when Caleb offered it. He heard her settling in above, the floor creaking softly as she arranged her bed. Caleb sat alone in his chair by the fire, watching shadows dance on the walls. The familiar prayers came to his lips. For guidance, for wisdom, for strength to do right by this wounded young soul God had somehow placed in his care. He wasn't sure what he'd invited into his life, taking on a guardian's role at his age. But watching Maddie's careful attempts to fit herself into this new space, he knew he couldn't have done otherwise. Outside snow fell steadily now, blanketing the ranch in white silence. The wind rattled the shutters again, but the cabin stood warm and solid against the storm, sheltering its inhabitants as it had for many years past. Dawn crept over the ranch, painting the world in soft greys and whites. A thin layer of snow dusted the ground like powdered sugar, just enough to crunch underfoot. Caleb stood at the base of the ladder leading to the loft, hesitating before calling up. "Maddie, sun's rising. Time for chores." He heard movement above, then her voice, already alert. "Coming down." She appeared moments later, hair neatly braided, wearing the same worn dress but with an old work coat of his draped over it. The sleeves hung past her fingertips, making her look even younger than her 16 years. "First thing's the milking," Caleb said, heading toward the door. "Then we feed the stock and split some kindling before breakfast." The morning air bit sharp and clean as they crossed to the barn. Inside, their breath made clouds in the lantern light. The cow, Maybelle, greeted them with a soft moo. Caleb demonstrated the milking technique, explaining the rhythm needed. Gentle but firm, she'll let you know if you're doing it wrong. Maddie settled onto the stool, tentative at first. But soon she found her pace, streams of warm milk hitting the bucket with practiced precision. "Done this before?" Caleb asked, impressed. "At Widow Chen's boarding house." Maddie's hands never faltered. "She had 2 cows, said I was a natural. After milking came feeding, hay for the horses, grain for the chickens, fresh water all around." Maddie worked steadily, her small frame belying her strength as she hefted hay bales and water buckets. At the woodpile, Caleb handed her the shorter splitting axe. "Mind your stance now. Let the weight of the head do the work." Maddie positioned a log, lifted the axe, and brought it down in one smooth motion. The wood split clean. She flashed him a quick grin. "Told you I was stronger than I look." They worked side by side, the steady thunk of axes and crack of splitting wood filling the crisp morning air. By the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge, they had a good pile of kindling and enough split logs to last several days. After a hearty breakfast of flapjacks and bacon, Caleb saddled Bearcat and an older mare named Dusty for Maddie. "Time to check fence lines," he said, loading tools into his saddlebags. "Best way to learn the property." They rode out under the winter sky, following the western fence line. Caleb pointed out landmarks, lightning-struck trees, distinctive rock formations, the creek that fed his pastures. Maddie proved an attentive student, asking smart questions about distances and directions. "Hold up!" she called suddenly, reining Dusty to a stop. "Wires down there, see?" She pointed to a section of fence nearly hidden by brush. Caleb had almost missed it. "Good eye," he said, dismounting to make repairs. "That's exactly what we're looking for." They found 2 more breaks before stopping for their midday meal in a sunny spot near the creek. Caleb spread his coat on a fallen log for them to sit on while they shared bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. "This creek's the lifeblood of the ranch," he explained, gesturing to where the water tumbled over rocks. "Feeds the north pasture in spring, keeps the stock watered year-round. Even the mission's well connects to it underground." Maddie watched the water flow, thoughtful. Must be why those mining fellows want it so bad. "What do you mean?" Heard talk at the mission, men in fancy coats measuring things, talking about water rights and diversions. She shrugged. "Nobody pays much mind to an orphan girl. I hear lots of things." Caleb filed this information away, troubled. The afternoon passed quickly as they completed their circuit of the property. The sun was setting when they rode back into the yard, and found 2 hawks waiting by the corral. The Ute trader's face was grave. He stood as they dismounted, raising one hand in greeting. "Brother Bear, the news could not wait." Caleb clasped his friend's arm. "Come inside where it's warm." In the kitchen, Maddie put coffee on while the men settled at the table. 2 hawks accepted his cup with a nod of thanks. "Murdoch's Gold Company is making plans," he said without preamble. "They mean to dig a big ditch, taking water from the creek above your land. It would leave both your pasture and the mission's well dry by summer." Caleb's hands tightened on his cup. "They can't do that. I've been watering stock here for 15 years. They think money speaks louder than years," 2 hawks said. They have already filed papers in town, unless someone challenges them soon. He spread his hands, the gesture eloquent. Then I'll file a water rights claim first thing tomorrow. Caleb said firmly. Ride to the county seat and make it official before they can push this through. I'm coming with you. Maddie spoke from near the stove, her voice steady. I saw those men at the mission. I can tell Judge Parker what I heard them planning. Two Hawks studied her with approval. The young one has warrior spirit. It'll be a hard ride. Caleb warned. 2 days there and back, if the weather holds. Maddie lifted her chin. I can ride as long as needed, and you might need a witness. Caleb considered her determined face, remembering how capable she'd proved today. Finally, he nodded. We'll leave at first light. Two Hawks, will you spread word to other ranchers who water from the creek? They'll want to file claims too. It will be done. Two Hawks promised, rising. The company men forget that water has more friends than gold. He touched his chest in farewell and slipped out into the gathering dark. Caleb and Maddie worked quietly, preparing for tomorrow's journey. The weight of the threat settled over the cabin like the snow outside, soft, cold, and capable of changing everything. The next morning dawned bitter cold, frost etching delicate patterns on the cabin windows. Caleb and Maddie worked in silence, packing supplies and readying the horses while stars still glimmered in the pale sky. Two Hawks arrived just as the sun peeked over the eastern ridge, leading his spotted pony. We take the back way, he announced, adjusting his horse's hackamore. Through Buffalo Canyon. Murdoch's men watch the main road. Caleb nodded, securing the last strap on Bearcat's saddle. Longer route, but safer. Much safer. Two Hawks agreed. They do not know these old paths. Maddie emerged from the cabin wearing Caleb's spare coat and carrying a bundle of food wrapped in cloth. Her eyes were bright with determination despite the early hour. She mounted Dusty without assistance, settling into the saddle like she'd been born to it. They set out single file, Two Hawks leading the way. The route took them through stands of blue spruce and aspen, their hoofbeats muffled by fallen needles and leaves. The morning warmed slowly as they climbed, though their breath still clouded in the mountain air. Around midday, they stopped in a sunny clearing to rest the horses. While they shared bread and dried beef, Two Hawks pointed to a spring bubbling from beneath a rocky outcrop. These waters have flowed since before my grandfather's time, he said, his voice carrying the weight of memory. Many springs like this one fed our people's camps, but settlers came, dug ditches, built dams. He gestured west. Now those camps are dry and we must go elsewhere. Maddie listened intently, chin propped on her knees. Couldn't your people file claims too? Some try, Two Hawks answered. But the white man's courts. He shrugged. Paper speaks louder than truth these days. That is why your guardian's claim is important. His paper might protect water for all who need it. They rode on through the afternoon, the trail winding higher into the hills before dropping down toward a narrow valley. As dusk approached, Two Hawks led them to a crude line shack, little more than 4 walls and a roof, but shelter enough from the cooling air. Inside, they found a stone fireplace, a rough plank table, and bunks built into the walls. While Caleb tended the horses, Maddie and Two Hawks got a fire going and heated beans and coffee. Tell me more about the water claims, Maddie said as they ate. How do they work? Two Hawks explained between bites. The paper tells who first used the water, and how, like marking territory but with writing instead of signs. If filed before others claim it, the law says that water is yours. If we file in time, Caleb added quietly. They bedded down early, Two Hawks taking first watch. The night passed without incident, and they were back on the trail before dawn. The second day's ride brought them down from the hills into more settled country. By late afternoon, they reached the county seat, a bustling town of wooden sidewalks and false-fronted buildings. Two Hawks bid them farewell at the outskirts. I will spread word to other ranchers, he promised. Return careful. Murdoch has many eyes. The county clerk's office occupied a narrow brick building near the courthouse. Inside, a thin man with ink-stained fingers looked up from his ledger as they entered. "Help you folks? Need to file a water rights claim," Caleb said, removing his hat. "For Crystal Creek, up by Copper Creek Settlement." The clerk's expression grew serious. "Timing's fortunate. Had some mining company fellows in here yesterday asking about that same waterway." He pulled out several forms. "But I should warn you, process isn't cheap. Filing fees $20, plus survey costs if the claim's contested." Caleb felt Maddie tense beside him. That was more than most ranchers saw in a month. But he'd come prepared, pulling a canvas bag from his coat. "How long before it's official?" "Could be weeks, months if there's opposition." The clerk dipped his pen. "Which I reckon there will be, given who's involved." They spent the next hour filling out paperwork, Caleb carefully describing his ranch's boundaries and water usage. Maddie added what she'd overheard at the mission about the company's plans, the clerk noting it all in his precise handwriting. As they stepped out onto the sidewalk, Maddie suddenly gripped Caleb's arm. Across the dusty street, Silas Murdoch lounged on the hotel's front porch, a cigar between his fingers. He lifted it in mocking salute. "Well, well, if it isn't the noble rancher and his ward." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Doing some legal business, are we?" Caleb steered Maddie toward their horses without responding. He could feel Murdoch's gaze following them until they turned the corner. They took a room at a smaller boarding house on the edge of town, away from the hotel. After a simple supper, Caleb double-checked the precious claim papers before locking them in his saddlebag. "Try to sleep," he told Maddie. "Long ride home tomorrow." But sleep proved elusive for the girl. She tossed on her narrow bed, finally drifting into uneasy dreams filled with dark figures and the sound of splintering wood. In her dream, she stood helpless as men tore down the mission's well pump, the water below turning to dust. She woke with a start, moonlight streaming through the window. Across the room, she could hear Caleb's steady breathing. The saddlebag with their papers sat close by, secure but somehow fragile against the forces gathering against them. Dawn painted the county seat's buildings in soft golden light as Caleb and Maddie made their way back to the clerk's office. The morning air held a crisp bite, and their boots echoed on the empty wooden sidewalks. Most businesses were still shuttered, but a thin trail of smoke already rose from the clerk's chimney. Inside, they found the clerk organizing his desk, inkpot and papers laid out with careful precision. He nodded at their arrival, gesturing for them to take seats while he finished recording their claim in his thick leather ledger. "Everything appears to be in order," he said, sanding the fresh ink. "I'll have copies sent to the territorial office by week's end." He handed Caleb their official receipt, the paper still warm from the impression of his seal. Maddie watched the document disappear into Caleb's vest pocket, her shoulders relaxing slightly. They'd taken the first step toward protecting their water rights, even if the road ahead remained uncertain. They collected their horses from the livery and set out under brightening skies. The return journey felt lighter somehow, without the weight of urgency that had driven them to town. They took the main road this time, keeping alert but encountering no trouble. By mid-morning, Maddie had grown comfortable enough to break their usual quiet. "You know, Mr. Hensley," she said, a hint of mischief in her voice, "I don't reckon I've ever met anyone quite as serious as you." Caleb glanced over, surprised by her playful tone. "That so?" "Yes, sir. Even when you smile, it's like you're studying on something heavy." She mimicked his thoughtful frown, then laughed when he raised an eyebrow at her. "Well now," he drawled, "maybe that's because some of us have important matters to consider, like keeping certain young ladies out of trouble." "Is that what you call it?" Maddie grinned. "Here I thought you were just naturally gloomy." The banter continued through their midday rest, Maddie gradually drawing Caleb out of his shell. She told stories about the various characters she'd met in mining camps, imitating their mannerisms until even Caleb had to chuckle. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they approached the turn-off to Copper Creek. Maddie grew quiet, her gaze drawn to the mission's weathered cross visible in the distance. "Could we stop?" she asked softly. "Just to check on things?" Caleb studied her face, seeing the concern there. "Reckon we could spare a few minutes." They found Reverend Teal in the mission's small courtyard, struggling with the iron pump handle. Water trickled weakly from the spout, and the mechanism groaned with each attempt to draw more. "Evening, Reverend," Caleb called as they dismounted. Teal straightened, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "Caleb, Maddie, what a blessing to see you both." His smile faltered as he glanced at the failing pump, though I wish the circumstances were better. "What's wrong with it?" Maddie asked, already moving closer to inspect the mechanism. "Started making that awful sound yesterday. Now it barely draws at all." Teal sighed. "I've tried everything I know, which admittedly isn't much when it comes to repairs." "Let me look," Maddie said. She knelt by the pump, running her fingers along the joints. "I helped fix one like this in a mining camp once. The leather gasket might be worn out." Caleb tied off their horses and rolled up his sleeves. "Better get some light if we're going to work on it. Sun'll be down soon." Teal hurried to fetch lanterns, while Maddie and Caleb began disassembling the pump head. As darkness fell, they worked by lamplight, their shadows dancing on the mission's walls. Maddie proved to know her way around the mechanism's inner workings, directing Caleb where to apply leverage while she examined worn parts. "See here?" She pointed to a cracked leather seal. "Water's getting past it instead of being drawn up." Caleb nodded. "Reverend, you got any leather scraps we could fashion into a new one?" They spent the next hour carefully cutting and fitting a replacement gasket from an old boot top Teal found. Maddie's small hands proved perfect for working in the tight space, while Caleb's strength helped reseat the heavy pump head. Finally, Teal took the handle and pushed down. The mechanism moved smoothly, and clear water gushed from the spout. "Praise the Lord." He breathed, genuine relief in his voice. He turned to Caleb, gripping his hand firmly. "I can't thank you enough, both of you." His eyes held shame as he met Caleb's gaze. "And I need to say, what I did before, with Maddie's guardianship, it was wrong. I let fear cloud my judgment, forgot to trust in the Lord's provision." "What's past is past," Caleb said quietly. "We all make mistakes." Maddie, who had been hanging back during this exchange, stepped forward with a small smile. "The pump should work fine now, Reverend." "Just needs regular greasing to keep the leather soft." Teal's eyes grew damp. "You've both shown more Christian charity than I deserved. Would you consider staying the night? It's full dark, and your old room in the loft is still made up, Maddie." They accepted the offer, too tired to continue riding. After a simple supper of bread and stew, they climbed the narrow stairs to the loft. The familiar space brought memories flooding back for Maddie. Some good, some painful. But somehow they felt distant now, like pages from someone else's story. Caleb took the floor near the stairs, leaving Maddie the small bed she'd once called her own. The old building creaked and settled around them, boards whispering in the night wind. But the sounds that had once seemed lonely to Maddie now felt almost comforting, like the mission itself was watching over their sleep. Through the loft's window, stars winked in the clear mountain sky. Maddie listened to Caleb's steady breathing, feeling safe in a way she hadn't during her previous stays here. Before drifting off, she whispered a quiet "thank you," to whom she wasn't quite sure. Perhaps to God, or perhaps to the gruff rancher who had somehow become her protector. The mission's weathered walls caught the first light of dawn, frost glittering on every surface like scattered diamonds. Caleb stood in the courtyard, checking their horses' tack while his breath fogged in the crisp morning air. Maddie emerged from the building with her bedroll tucked under one arm, pausing to watch the sunrise paint the eastern sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Reverend Teal came out to bid them farewell, clutching a steaming cup of coffee. "Safe travels," he said, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "And thank you again for the pump repair. "Much obliged for the bed," Caleb replied, touching the brim of his hat. He helped Maddie mount up, then swung into his own saddle. The morning chill clung to them as they rode away from Copper Creek, hooves crunching through the silvered grass. Frost had transformed the landscape overnight, each blade and branch wearing a delicate white coating that sparkled in the strengthening sunlight. Their horses' breath came out in great plumes, mixing with the morning mist that hugged the ground. Maddie rode beside Caleb in silence, her expression distant. Now and then, she would adjust her coat or tug her hat lower against the cold, but mostly she just stared ahead, lost in thought. Caleb didn't press her to talk. He'd learned that the girl spoke when ready and kept her own counsel otherwise. The sun climbed higher as they made their way home, gradually burning off the frost and warming the air. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and share some jerky and hardtack, but even then, Maddie remained unusually quiet. It was late afternoon by the time they crested the final ridge overlooking Caleb's ranch. The familiar sight of the cabin and barn nestled in the valley usually brought him comfort. But something felt off today. He reined Bearcat to a stop, scanning the property carefully. "Everything all right?" Maddie asked, noticing his hesitation. "Think so," he said slowly. "Just being careful." They descended into the valley as evening approached, shadows lengthening across the pasture. When they reached the cabin, Caleb caught a whiff of smoke. Faint but distinct. He dismounted and walked around the building, checking the chimney and walls, but found nothing obviously amiss. "Probably just draft from the cold chimney," he muttered, more to convince himself than anything else. Still, the scent nagged at him. Inside, they went about their evening routine. Maddie proved her worth in the kitchen again, turning their remaining trail provisions into a hearty stew. They ate in companionable silence, both tired from the journey. "Best tend to the horses before it gets full dark," Caleb said as they finished their meal. He lit a lantern and headed for the barn, Maddie following close behind. The horses nickered softly as they entered. Everything looked normal at first glance, feed boxes filled, water troughs clean, tack hanging in its proper place. But as Caleb moved deeper into the barn, the lantern light revealed something that made him freeze. Fresh hoof prints marked the packed earth near the back stall, prints that didn't match the pattern of his own stock. Someone had been in here while they were gone. "Maddie," he said quietly, "come look at this." She knelt beside the prints, studying them with the same keen eye she'd shown while tracking on their journey. "These are fresh," she confirmed. "Made since the frost this morning." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Stay close to the house tonight. I'm keeping the lantern burning." They finished tending to their horses quickly, double-checking that everything was secured. As they walked back to the cabin, Maddie's voice came soft in the gathering darkness. "Mr. Hensley? Yes? Would Murdoch?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Would he burn a man out for water? Caleb stopped walking, turning to face her. The lantern light caught the worry in her eyes, making her look younger than her 16 years. He considered sugarcoating his answer, but knew she deserved the truth. "He'd do worse," he said grimly. "Men like that, they don't stop at burning. They'll do whatever it takes to get what they want." Maddie nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she'd already suspected. They continued to the cabin in silence, both aware that the peaceful routine of ranch life had been forever changed by those strange hoofprints in the barn. Inside, Caleb placed the lantern in the window, where its light would be visible from the barn. He checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded and within easy reach. Maddie went about her evening tasks with careful efficiency, but he noticed how she kept glancing at the windows, watching the darkness beyond the lantern's glow. The night settled around them like a heavy blanket, bringing with it all the usual sounds of the ranch: crickets chirping, night birds calling, the occasional distant howl of a coyote. But tonight, those familiar sounds seemed somehow more ominous, as if they might be hiding other, more dangerous noises beneath their chorus. Caleb sat in his chair by the fire, appearing to read his Bible but really listening intently to every sound from outside. Maddie took longer than usual with her evening chores, clearly reluctant to climb up to her loft bed. When she finally did, Caleb noticed she kept her boots on. The lantern burned steadily in the window, its flame reflecting off the glass like a lonely star in the darkness. Caleb settled in for a long night of watching, knowing that somewhere out there, Murdoch was plotting his next move in this dangerous game of water rights and revenge. The crackle of flames jolted Maddie from her sleep. Through the loft window, an orange glow flickered against the pre-dawn sky. Shouts echoed from outside, Caleb's voice, rough with urgency. "Fire! The barn's caught fire!" Maddie scrambled down the ladder, her boots already on from the night before. She burst through the cabin door into the bitter cold, her breath catching at the sight before her. Flames licked up the barn's wooden walls, smoke billowing into the dark sky. Caleb was already racing between the water pump and the burning building, a sloshing bucket in each hand. "The horses!" Maddie cried, running towards the barn. "Got 'em out!" Caleb shouted back. "But the hay storage, grab those buckets!" She seized 2 empty buckets from beside the pump and fell into rhythm with Caleb. Pump, fill, run, throw, repeat. Her arms ached from working the pump handle, but she didn't slow down. The flames roared louder, consuming the dry hay stored in the barn's loft. A thunderous crack split the air as a burning timber crashed down. A frightened whinny pierced through the chaos. Maddie's horse had broken free from where Caleb had tied her and bolted back toward the barn. "Sugar, no!" Maddie lunged forward, but Caleb caught her arm. "Too dangerous!" Before he could stop her, Maddie twisted free and ran towards her horse. Sugar reared in panic as another beam fell, striking her hindquarters. The mare stumbled sideways, legs buckling. Maddie reached her just as Caleb arrived, and together they led the injured horse away from the inferno. Dawn crept over the hills as they fought the fire. The sun rose to find them exhausted, covered in soot, but finally winning the battle. About half the barn still stood, though charred. The hay storage was destroyed, along with most of their winter feed. Sugar limped in the corral, a nasty gash across her back leg. Maddie sat heavily on an overturned bucket, her face streaked with ash and tears. Caleb stood beside her, his broad shoulders slumped with fatigue. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The attack they'd feared had come. The morning sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of the damage. They worked silently, clearing debris and tending to Sugar's wound. The mare flinched under Maddie's gentle hands as she cleaned the cut with water and witch hazel. Hoofbeats approached around mid-morning. Caleb reached for his rifle, but relaxed when 2 hawks appeared around the bend. The Ute trader's normally calm face showed concern as he surveyed the scene. "I saw smoke from the ridge," 2 hawks said, dismounting. "Murdoch's work?" Caleb nodded grimly. "Had to be. No natural cause for this." 2 hawks' expression darkened. "There is more bad news. I spoke with a friend who works near the county office." He paused, looking between Caleb and Maddie. "The clerk was paid to misplace your water rights filing. The papers are gone." Maddie's hand stilled on Sugar's leg. She watched Caleb's face, seeing the weight of this new blow settle onto him. All their careful planning, the long ride to file the claim, erased with a handful of coins. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice small against the vastness of their trouble. "Without proof of filing—" Caleb shook his head. "They'll claim first rights to the water. Legal or not, they've got the money to make it stick." 2 hawks moved closer, speaking low. "There may be another way. The Ute tribe has ancient claims to these springs. If we joined our cause with yours—" "No." Caleb cut in. "I won't drag your people into this fight. Murdoch's company would only use it as excuse to push harder against the reservation borders." The 3 of them worked through the afternoon, salvaging what they could from the barn. 2 hawks helped brace the remaining walls with fresh timber, but eventually he had to leave. As he mounted up, he gave Caleb a long look. "A man's water is his life out here," he said. "Think on what I said." The sun set behind gathering clouds, painting the smoke-stained sky in muted reds. Inside the cabin, Maddie moved through the familiar motions of preparing supper: beans, cornbread, the last of their dried beef. The routine felt hollow now, like play acting at normal life. Caleb sat at the table, his Bible unopened beside his plate. The silence hung heavy between them as they ate, broken only by the clink of spoons against tin plates. Outside, a cold wind rattled the window panes, carrying the acrid smell of wet ashes. Maddie watched Caleb push his food around, barely eating. His face was drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, the look of a man seeing his life's work slipping through his fingers. She wanted to say something to help, to offer some hope, but words felt inadequate against the size of their losses. The barn's charred skeleton stood as a dark reminder against the night sky. Their water rights were gone. Sugar might never ride properly again. And somewhere out there, Murdoch was surely celebrating his victory, planning his next move to drive them from the land. They finished their meal in that same heavy silence, the weight of defeat pressing down like a physical thing. Neither seemed able to voice the question hanging in the air. What would they do now? Dawn brought a bitter chill that seeped through every crack in the cabin walls. Frost painted delicate patterns on the window panes, and the water in the wash basin had a thin crust of ice. Maddie's breath formed small clouds as she moved quietly around the loft, gathering her meager possessions. She folded her spare dress and tucked it into her bedroll, along with her mother's tarnished silver brush. The tin box that held her few treasures, a worn deck of cards, a broken pocket watch, and a faded ribbon, felt heavy in her hands. Each item represented a different fragment of her scattered life. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she crept down the ladder. Maybe if she left before Caleb woke, it would be easier. She'd caused nothing but trouble since arriving: the burned barn, the lost water rights, Sugar's injury. Her presence seemed to bring misfortune wherever she went. Going somewhere? Caleb's quiet voice made her jump. He sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling before him. His eyes were tired, but alert. Maddie clutched her bedroll tighter. I thought, maybe it'd be better if I moved on, before anything else happens. Set those things down and come here. His tone was gentle, but firm. Reluctantly, Maddie placed her belongings by the door and slid onto the bench across from him. The rough wood was cold beneath her palms. Running away never fixed anything, Caleb said, pushing a cup of coffee toward her. Believe me, I know. After my Sarah died, I wanted to sell everything and disappear. Maddie wrapped her fingers around the warm cup but didn't drink. Why didn't you? Because the land needs someone to care for it. The cattle need tending. And now, he met her eyes across the table. You need a home. But I'm just making things worse. The words burst out of her. If you hadn't won that poker game— If I hadn't won that game, you'd be cooking in some mining camp right now. Caleb's voice hardened at the thought. This isn't your fault, Maddie. None of it. He stood and walked to the window, frost crunching under his boots. Truth is, sometimes I reckon I'm cursed. No children of my own, and now this. He gestured toward the damaged barn. But giving up? That's exactly what Murdoch wants. A knock at the door interrupted them. 2 hawks entered, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He nodded to them both, his dark eyes taking in Maddie's packed belongings by the door. The young one plans to leave? He asked. Not anymore, Caleb answered firmly. But we need a new plan. That water rights claim is gone, and without it— 2 hawks moved closer to the stove, warming his hands. There may be a way. He spoke carefully, choosing each word. In the mountains there is a spring. The eldest of our council, Grey Wolf, still holds legal claim to it from before the treaties. Maddie sat straighter, hope flickering in her chest. Caleb turned from the window, his expression intent. If Grey Wolf could be persuaded to assign his rights— 2 hawks continued, it would give you stronger claim than any paper Murdoch could buy. The spring feeds the same creek that waters your land." "Would he consider it?" Caleb asked. Two Hawks smiled slightly. "He remembers when your father helped our people during the hard winter of 1868. And he has no love for the gold company that poisons streams with their mining." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "How far to his camp?" 2 days' ride into the mountains. The trail is steep, but I know the way." Maddie looked between them, hardly daring to hope. "When do we leave?" "We?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "I can ride double with you," she insisted. "Sugar's leg needs rest anyway, and I want to help." Two Hawks nodded approvingly. "The girl has courage. Grey Wolf will respect that." Caleb studied Maddie's determined face for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. "All right. We'll leave at first light tomorrow. The weather's turning colder. We'll need to pack warm." They spent the rest of the morning preparing for the journey. Maddie unpacked her bedroll and instead filled it with extra blankets and food supplies. She worked alongside Caleb, checking tack and mending a tear in his heavy coat. The task felt right, purposeful, so different from her earlier attempt to slip away. Two Hawks left to make his own preparations, but promised to return before dawn. As the short winter day faded into dusk, Maddie and Caleb sat by the fire, studying an old map Two Hawks had left. The route into the mountains looked challenging, but the spring he'd marked could be their salvation. "Thank you," Maddie said suddenly, "for stopping me this morning." Caleb looked up from the map. "Way I see it, God put us together for a reason. Maybe this is part of it." She nodded, warming her hands by the fire. The idea of belonging somewhere, of having a purpose beyond mere survival, felt as warming as the flames. "Get some rest," Caleb said, rolling up the map. "Tomorrow's ride will be long." Maddie climbed to her loft, but this time she left her possessions unpacked. Whatever came next, she would face it here, with the family she'd found. Outside, the wind whistled through the burned barn's skeleton, but it no longer sounded like defeat. Instead, it carried the whisper of hope, of a mountain spring that might save them all. The stars still glittered in the dark sky when Caleb gently shook Maddie awake. She blinked, disoriented for a moment before remembering their mission. The cabin was cold. The fire had died down to embers during the night. "Time to go," Caleb whispered, already fully dressed in his heaviest coat. Maddie hurried to pull on her warmest layers, grateful for the thick woolen socks Caleb had given her the night before. Her breath formed little clouds in the frigid air as she climbed down from the loft. A simple breakfast of coffee and cornbread waited on the table. They ate quickly, neither speaking much, both lost in thoughts about the journey ahead. Outside, the crunch of hooves on frozen ground announced Two Hawks' arrival. "The weather holds," Two Hawks said as they stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. "But we must move fast. Storm clouds gather in the mountains." Bearcat stamped impatiently as Caleb secured their supplies. The big horse's coat was already growing thick for winter, and steam rose from his flanks in the cold air. Maddie climbed up behind Caleb, wrapping her arms around his waist for balance. They set out just as the eastern sky began to lighten. Two Hawks led the way, his horse picking carefully along the trail. The first hour passed quietly, with only the steady rhythm of hooves and the occasional call of an early rising bird. As the sun rose, the path began to climb. What started as a gentle slope soon became steeper, the trail switching back and forth across the mountainside. The air grew thinner, and their breath came in sharp puffs of white vapor. "We walk from here," Two Hawks announced, dismounting at a particularly steep section. "The trail is too treacherous for riding." Maddie's legs were stiff from the cold as she slid down from Bearcat's back. The ground was slick with patches of ice hidden under a light dusting of snow. She took careful steps, leading Bearcat while Caleb walked ahead. Despite her caution, a patch of black ice caught her by surprise. Her feet went out from under her, and she landed hard on her backside. Both men turned at her startled yelp. To their surprise, Maddie burst out laughing. "Well, that's one way to wake up." She brushed snow from her skirts as she got to her feet, still chuckling. Caleb's worried expression softened into a smile, and even Two Hawks' eyes crinkled with amusement. Her laughter seemed to lighten the mood as they continued their careful ascent. The sun was high overhead when Two Hawks held up his hand, signaling them to stop. Below them, nestled in a protected valley, lay a small settlement of several hide-covered lodges. Smoke rose straight up from cooking fires in the still mountain air. "White Elk's camp," Two Hawks explained. "We must approach with respect. Let me speak first." They led their horses down into the valley. Children playing near the edge of the camp spotted them first, running to alert the adults. By the time they reached level ground, several men had gathered to meet them. The eldest stepped forward, White Elk, his face deeply lined with age and wisdom. His black eyes were sharp as they assessed the newcomers. Two Hawks greeted him in Ute, then switched to English for Caleb and Maddie's benefit. "These are the friends I spoke of," Two Hawks said. "Caleb Hensley and his ward, Maddie Bell. They seek your counsel about the spring." White Elk nodded slowly but said nothing, waiting for them to state their business. Caleb cleared his throat, about to speak, when Maddie stepped forward. "Sir," she began, her voice clear and direct, "there are children at the mission who need clean water. The mining company wants to take it all for themselves, leaving nothing for anyone else." She met his gaze steadily. "They've already tried burning our barn and destroying our legal claim." Caleb watched in amazement as Maddie continued, speaking plainly about the mission children she'd known, their hopes and struggles. She described how the mission's well was already running low, and how the proposed mining ditch would leave both the mission and Caleb's ranch without water. White Elk listened intently, his expression unchanging. When Maddie finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "The spring you speak of has been in my people's care since before the treaties," he said finally. "Its waters are pure and sacred to us." He looked at Two Hawks. "You vouch for these people?" "I do," Two Hawks answered. "Caleb Hensley is a man of honor, like his father before him. The girl speaks truth about the mining company's greed." White Elk nodded slowly. "Such matters require careful thought. I will give you my answer when the sun rises tomorrow." He gestured to a flat area near the edge of the camp. "You may rest here tonight, share our fire and food." They made camp where indicated, grateful for the shelter of a small grove of pine trees. As evening approached, White Elk's family brought them bowls of rich venison stew, thick with wild onions and roots. The aroma made Maddie's mouth water. Around the communal fire, children watched them with curious eyes, while women worked on beadwork and men repaired hunting tools. The atmosphere was peaceful, domestic. Maddie found herself drawn into conversation with White Elk's granddaughter, who was close to her own age. As night fell and stars began to appear above the mountains, Maddie noticed White Elk watching her. His expression was thoughtful as she helped his granddaughter gather firewood, the two girls laughing together despite their different languages. Later, as they settled into their bedrolls, Caleb spoke quietly. "You surprised me today, speaking up like that." Maddie pulled her blanket closer against the mountain cold. "I just told the truth. Those children at the mission, they deserve a chance, same as anyone." "Sometimes the plainest truth speaks loudest," Two Hawks commented from his place by the fire. "Rest now. Tomorrow will bring its own answers." The night wind whispered through the pines as they drifted off to sleep, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the promise of morning. The eastern sky painted itself in delicate shades of pink and gold as dawn crept over the mountains. Frost sparkled on the ground around their camp, and their breath hung in white clouds in the crisp morning air. Caleb, Maddie, and Two Hawks were already awake, having risen before first light to prepare for White Elk's answer. The elder emerged from his lodge as the sun cleared the horizon, his face solemn in the early morning light. The camp stirred to life around them as women stoked cooking fires and children emerged sleepy-eyed from their homes. White Elk motioned for them to join him near the central fire, where coffee bubbled in a blackened pot. I have thought long through the night. White Elk began, accepting a cup of coffee from his daughter. The spring has been in my people's care since the time of my grandfather's grandfather. Its waters are pure, sacred to us. He paused, studying each of their faces in turn. But water is life itself. It was not meant to be hoarded or stolen. Maddie held her breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her, Caleb sat perfectly still, his expression carefully neutral. White Elk continued, I will grant the rights to the spring, but with one condition. He fixed his gaze on Caleb. The water must be shared equally with the mission. The children there must never go thirsty. Caleb nodded without hesitation. You have my word, sir. The mission will have equal claim to the water. Then we are agreed. White Elk extended his hand, and Caleb shook it solemnly. The handshake sealed more than just a water rights agreement. It represented trust between two men who understood the true value of keeping one's word. They broke camp quickly after that, knowing time was precious. Two Hawks helped them gather their belongings, while White Elk's grandson drew a detailed map, showing the spring's location and boundaries. The morning sun had barely cleared the treetops when they mounted up to leave. Ride swift, White Elk called after them. The mining man will not rest until he knows he is beaten. The descent from the mountain was faster than their climb had been, though they still had to lead the horses through the steepest sections. Maddie's legs ached from the previous day's journey, but she pushed on without complaint. Every hour counted now. They reached level ground by mid-morning and set a hard pace across the valley. Two Hawks led them along the shortest route to Copper Creek, cutting across dry creek beds and through stands of pine. They stopped only when necessary to rest the horses, sharing jerky and hard biscuits from their saddlebags. How far to town? Maddie asked during one such break, massaging her sore muscles. 3 hours if we push hard, Two Hawks answered, checking Bearcat's hooves for stones. The notary closes his office at sundown. Caleb nodded grimly. Then we ride hard. The afternoon sun beat down on them as they thundered across the open country. Maddie clung tight to Caleb, her face buried against his back to shield it from the wind. The steady rhythm of hoofbeats filled her ears as the miles rolled past. They clattered into Copper Creek just as the afternoon shadows were beginning to lengthen. The town was quiet, with only a few people moving along the boardwalks. Caleb reined Bearcat to a stop in front of the territorial office, his boots raising small clouds of dust as he dismounted. Wait here with Two Hawks, he told Maddie, helping her down. I will fetch the notary. The territorial notary was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles who looked startled at Caleb's urgent entrance. But when he examined White Elk's written grant and the carefully drawn map, he nodded with approval. Everything appears to be in order, he said, reaching for his official seal. Though I must say this is quite unusual. Not many settlers receive water rights from the Ute. The agreement benefits all parties, Caleb replied simply. The scratch of pen on paper filled the quiet office as the notary drew up the formal documents. Maddie and Two Hawks joined them inside, watching as Caleb signed his name with careful deliberation. The notary was just pressing his seal into the red wax when the office door burst open. Silas Murdoch stood in the doorway, his face dark with fury. His usually immaculate clothes were dusty from hard riding, and his eyes blazed as they fixed on the papers on the notary's desk. What's this? He demanded, striding forward. Some sort of trick? No trick, Murdoch, Caleb answered calmly, picking up the newly notarized documents. Just a legal transfer of water rights. The spring now belongs jointly to my ranch and the mission. Murdoch's face flushed red. You can't do this. The company has plans for that water. We have investors counting on it. Should have secured the right sooner then, Caleb replied, carefully folding the papers and tucking them into his vest pocket. He settled his hat on his head and turned to Maddie. Ready to head home? She nodded, fighting back a smile at Murdoch's obvious frustration. Together they walked to the door, Two Hawks following close behind. At the threshold, Caleb paused and turned back. He touched the brim of his hat in a courteous gesture, that somehow made Murdoch's face darken even further. "Good day to you, sir," he said, and then walked out into the late afternoon sunlight with Maddie at his side. Behind them, through the office's open door, they could hear Murdoch's angry voice demanding to see the notary's record books. But it didn't matter now. The spring was legally theirs, the papers safely secured, and the mission's water supply protected. Bearcat nickered softly as they approached, and Maddie patted his neck before Caleb helped her mount up. The sun was setting behind the mountains as they turned toward home, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Their shadows stretched long across the dusty street as they rode out of town, leaving Murdoch and his schemes behind them. Snow began drifting down in lazy spirals as Caleb and Maddie crossed the last ridge toward home. The late afternoon light filtered through heavy clouds, casting a pearly glow across the landscape. Bearcat's hooves crunched through the thin crust of earlier snowfall, his breath steaming in the cold air. "Looks like winter's finally settling in proper," Caleb observed, adjusting his scarf against the growing chill. Maddie huddled closer behind him, her cheek pressed against his coat. Good timing, getting that spring secured before the real snow hits. Over the next few weeks, they worked steadily to establish the water line from White Elk's spring. Two hawks brought several Ute men skilled in laying pipe, their knowledge of the mountain's contours proving invaluable. They chose the best route down the slope, marking it with stakes and cairns before the serious work began. The labor was demanding. Trenches had to be dug deep enough to protect the pipes from freezing, and every joint needed careful sealing. Maddie proved herself again, carrying tools and helping wherever needed despite the bitter cold. She worked alongside Caleb from sunup to sundown, her determination matching his own. "You're doing more than your share," Caleb told her one evening as they warmed themselves by the fire. She smiled, rubbing her chapped hands. "It's our ranch now, ain't it? Our water. Our future." The words touched something deep in Caleb's heart, and he had to look away to hide the moisture in his eyes. When the last section of pipe was finally laid, connecting both the ranch and the mission to the spring's clear flow, Reverend Teal proposed a gathering to bless the new water source. Word spread quickly through Copper Creek, and on a crisp Sunday afternoon, townsfolk began arriving at the mission. They gathered in the mission's yard, where the new pump stood gleaming. Children darted between adults' legs, their laughter carrying on the winter air. Steam rose from pots of coffee and chocolate, set up on rough wooden tables, while church ladies laid out platters of cornbread and pie. Caleb stood somewhat awkwardly near the pump, uncomfortable being the center of attention. Maddie remained close to his side, her eyes bright as she watched the community come together. Even two hawks and several members of his band attended, standing respectfully at the edge of the gathering. Reverend Teal raised his hands for silence, and the crowd gradually quieted. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air, "we're gathered here today to give thanks for this blessing of water, and for the good people who made it possible." The preacher's eyes crinkled as he looked at Caleb and Maddie. "Some of you might remember a certain poker game a few months back. When our friend Caleb here won guardianship of young Maddie, there were those who doubted his intentions." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. "But the Lord works in mysterious ways," Teal continued. "What started with a game of cards has become something truly remarkable. Caleb didn't just win a ward that night, he found a daughter, and together they've secured water rights that will benefit this entire community for generations to come." Warm laughter and approving murmurs spread through the gathering. Maddie's cheeks flushed pink, but she stood tall beside Caleb, her chin lifted proudly. From the corner of his eye, Caleb spotted Silas Murdoch at the edge of the crowd, his face unreadable. Without a word, the gambler turned and slipped away, leaving only footprints in the fresh snow. Reverend Teal lifted a tin cup filled with spring water. "Let us pray," he said, bowing his head. "Lord, we thank you for this pure water, for faithful hearts, and for showing us that family can be found in the most unexpected places." The gathered people bowed their heads, their amens rising like smoke in the winter air. As Caleb looked around at the faces of his neighbors, 2 hawks nodding solemnly, the mission children bouncing with excitement, Maddie beaming beside him. He felt a peace settle over him that had nothing to do with the gently falling snow. The snow lay 3 feet deep by Christmas Eve, transforming the Colorado landscape into a pristine white blanket. Caleb stood in the barn doorway, watching Maddie struggle through the drifts with a wooden sign tucked under her arm. Her determination brought a smile to his weathered face. "Need a hand there?" he called out, already trudging toward her through the snow. "Almost got it," she replied, her breath clouding in the cold air. Together, they positioned the freshly painted sign at the gate. The words Hensley and Bell Ranch stood out bold against the dark wood, the ampersand curving gracefully between their names. "Looks right proper," Caleb said softly, studying how the new sign changed the whole appearance of the entrance. Maddie brushed snow from her mittens. "Reckon it does. Pa." The word hung in the crisp air between them, tentative but sure. Caleb's heart squeezed in his chest, and he had to clear his throat before speaking. "Let's get inside before we freeze solid." The cabin glowed with warmth and lamplight. A plump chicken roasted in the cook stove, filling the air with savory aromas. Maddie had outdone herself with the biscuits, golden brown and steaming as Caleb broke one open. They sat across from each other at the worn table, passing dishes back and forth in comfortable silence. The lantern cast dancing shadows on the log walls, and outside the windows, fat snowflakes drifted past like falling stars. Caleb bowed his head, closing his eyes in quiet prayer. The emptiness that had haunted him for so many years, the ache of a childless home, the echo of his wife's absence, seemed to soften and ease. In its place bloomed a different kind of joy, unexpected but no less precious. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, "for giving me not the life I thought I wanted, but the one I needed all along. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.